In 1973, conflict engulfed much of South Africa. Under the banner of apartheid and the subjugation of the black population, countless black people died, suffering from the arbitrary oppression, cruelty, and killing inflicted by white people. Even though being black is not a crime, nor does it cause harm to others, it is simply a matter of genetics. The lives of black people were subjected to multifaceted oppression amid the senseless racial discrimination by white people. Two friends, Timothy, Tim, and Stephen, were vigorously conducting anti-apartheid activities in their own way. One day, while carrying out an anti-racism demonstration near the Parliament building, Tim and Stephen were arrested. Tim's girlfriend, who was a black woman, came to the police station while they were detained and gave some money to bribe the judge. However, the stubborn Tim kept the money for himself, unwilling to hand it over to the judge. During the trial, the evidence against Tim and Stephen was clear. Even though they were white, they supported the black population, and they had conducted provocative acts in 26 prominent locations. Although both Tim and Stephen came from good family backgrounds, the current case was a major, near-political offense. As the main perpetrator, Tim was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and Stephen, as an accomplice, was sentenced to 8 years. Following the judicial process under South African law, both Tim and Stephen were to begin serving their respective sentences at Pretoria Central Prison. Before being transferred to the prison, Stephen attempted to escape but failed. He was caught and his face was beaten. Even upon arriving at the prison, because their crime was supporting black people, they had to endure a sermon from the warden, who called them good white men who betray their own race. After reading out the rules, such as no pens, radios, or newspapers, no political conversations, no parcels larger than 4 by 6 inches, no sexual activity, and visitors once a month, Tim and Stephen underwent the necessary examinations. After the examination, both Tim and Stephen were to spend a significant part of their lives in the place called prison for their crime. Luckily, the friends, Tim and Stephen, were housed in adjacent cells. Having gone from a free life to a narrow, dark cell overnight, Tim couldn't sleep all night, lost in countless thoughts. The night passed, and at 7 a.m., the alarm sounded. The duty guard opened the cell doors, signaling time for the inmates to use the restroom and eat breakfast. Not all inmates in the prison wore the same uniform. Inmates like Tim wore light gray/charcoal uniforms, while others serving time for murder wore blue uniforms. During breakfast, Tim and Stephen befriended a man named Nick. Even within the prison, racial segregation was quite severe. While having breakfast, Tim and Stephen were discussing breaking out of prison. So during the exercise period, Nick explained that escaping was impossible due to the prison structure. The prison wall was about 20 feet high, and there was an inner wall with mesh and barbed wire. At night, searchlights constantly illuminated every area, and guards, with a shoot first, talk later policy, patrolled the top of the prison wall 24 hours a day. Furthermore, the underground tunnels led only back into the prison. It was an absolutely escape-proof prison, meticulously designed in every aspect. Nick told Tim that everyone who arrives here wants to escape after about a week, but the last person who tried to break out did not meet a good end. Therefore, Nick concluded that Tim and Stephen were prisoners of an inescapable prison, and attempting to break out would either result in death or an extended sentence. After Nick left, a man named Lino approached Tim and Stephen. Lino claimed Nick was just spreading nonsense, and that prison was merely a confined life behind brick walls. He encouraged Tim and Stephen to try, saying he would join them. Constantly searched for ways to escape the prison. After considering numerous methods, he found the simplest and most likely one, making a duplicate key. In the communal shower room, when Tim revealed his plan, Lino immediately dismissed the idea of digging a tunnel. Tim explained that he would be making a fake key and had tested the idea the previous night using a sketchbook and a pencil. Lino worried that a wooden key would break, but Tim, having studied it carefully, said it wouldn't break if the wood grain was used correctly, and they could get the necessary materials from the prison workshop. Lino was skeptical, but Stephen insisted that, as Lino once said, they should try, even if it was a first attempt. The three agreed to execute the plan. The first step was to memorize the keys hanging from the guards' belts, as they had no other aids. Life for black inmates in the prison was subservient to everyone else, and Tim, though unhappy about it, could only watch helplessly. Tim repeatedly observed one key, drawing it in stages until he formed a sketch. Once he had the perfect blueprint, Tim managed to bring some necessary materials from the construction room, subtly concealing them in a coffee can. Lino and Stephen helped Tim ensure the guards did not notice his activities. Working diligently all night with the materials, Tim successfully created a copy of his cell key. When he tested it, it worked. However, Tim had only been able to duplicate the inner cell door key. To open the cell, there was a 3-inch thick steel door that could only be opened from the outside. Moreover, since it was a prison, the door had multiple locks that could only be opened with the guard's key ring. Not easily discouraged, Tim and his friends decided to duplicate the entire key ring. Through observing the key ring, sketching the keys, and forming them in wood, Tim finally managed to make a copy of the key for the outer cell door on the 100th day. They only got a chance to test the key for the door that opened from the outside during the day when they were cleaning the walkway. The other inmates, though not directly helping the trio, made sure not to interfere. The second key successfully opened the lock, but the key broke. Tim tried to retrieve the broken piece but it was jammed. A duty guard arrived, forcing them to leave the door as it was. Tim was worried when the guards came to lock the cells in the evening, but he was relieved when they didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Lino had an underage son and had about 15 more years left on his sentence. He only got to see his son for about half an hour during the annual visitation, which is why he desperately wanted to escape. Although they had the second key, it could only be opened from the outside. Lino's method could only insert the key, not turn it, which was proving difficult. While they were discussing this, a guard arrived. Stephen pretended to be sweeping and suddenly had a good idea. The cells had windows, and if they could open the outer door with a broomstick through the window, they could open the outer door. The problem of turning the key remained. As they pondered, Stephen saw a pulley that was turned by hand and got another idea. Following Stephen's suggestion, Tim attached a rotating fitting to the end of the broomstick and tried to turn the key. It worked. During this test, the key broke off and fell outside the cell, forcing Tim to frantically retrieve it. The next morning, Tim told Stephen and Lino that he had managed to open both their cell doors. The three quietly celebrated their victory. The guards were suspicious, watching them closely and issuing warnings. Nick, who knew about their plan, warned them to be careful when crossing the area with the expert sharpshooters. If they were unlucky, they would die. If they were lucky, they would get an additional 25 years. The other inmates, even if they weren't directly involved in Tim's activities, pretended not to notice. As they achieved success step by step, Tim invited others to join their escape, but everyone refused, citing the high stakes. They just offered to help Tim and his friends. Tim decided to duplicate all the keys the guards possessed, not knowing what other doors lay ahead. Even if they could open all the doors, they couldn't leave the prison in inmate uniforms. Tim approached a black inmate, who was basically the servant of the entire prison, and bribed him with cigarettes and soap. Every person who arrives at the prison must change into an inmate uniform, regardless of what they wore outside. The black inmate stole some of the clothes left behind for Tim and his friends. One day, Tim learned that the black man who had helped him, the one he had given new glasses to, had been hanged 3 days prior. The following night, Tim and Lino piled clothes on their beds to make it look like they were sleeping and secretly left their cells. While the guard was checking the cells, Tim and Lino used the small room under the stairs as cover and began unlocking the other doors, one by one, with their duplicate keys. Aided by alerts from the other inmates, they successfully avoided the guards and opened the successive doors with their fake keys. Tim's plan was just to test if the keys worked. Although the guard noticed some sweat drops from Lino near one of the doors, he didn't care as he didn't know what it was. Upon returning to their cells, Tim carefully hid the working keys and immediately destroyed the non-working ones. The next morning, Tim and everyone in his section were being interrogated under suspicion because Tim didn't wake up even when the alarm sounded. The warden searched Tim's cell and found the broken pieces of the key that Tim had destroyed the previous night. Fortunately, Tim was able to lie, claiming they were pieces for a photo frame, and since the shape was indistinct, the warden was none the wiser. Tim continued to work hard day after day, and by the 404th day, he had successfully created duplicates for almost all the keys to the multiple prison doors. He hid the keys in various places so no one would discover them. Nick and many of the other inmates were afraid of the sharpshooters and the watchtowers they would face outside, even if they could get out of the prison. Tim told them that the current watchtower was still under construction and, since he had the keys, he invited them all to come along. Lino called the hesitant Nick a coward. Nick then revealed that he had been opposing apartheid in South Africa since before they were born. He and his siblings willingly served their sentences, standing with the black people until the end. He said he had been in prison for 15 years and had only watched his children grow up from the visitor's room. In the current situation, the potential costs were too high for an uncertain outcome, which is why they decided not to join. The quick-tempered Lino countered that this decision would lead to lifelong regret and stormed off. The guards conducted another inspection of the cells before their shift ended, but it went smoothly. In the evening, after the prison guards had left for the day, Tim came out of his cell with a bundle of clothes and unlocked the doors for the other two. Tim urged Nick one last time to join them, but Nick simply told them to take care. As the three of them changed into the civilian clothes obtained with the help of the black inmate, a remaining prison guard was searching the storeroom, trying to find tools to fix a clogged toilet pipe. Not knowing the situation, the three of them went and hid in the storeroom. The original plan was for Tim and his friends to hide in the storeroom until the guard finished checking the cells, but because of the toilet issue, the guard was returning to the storeroom. Nick, realizing the mistake, broke a light bulb and shouted, calling the guard to the cell area. This distraction allowed Tim and his friends to narrowly escape the storeroom. They successfully passed through the multiple doors with Tim's duplicate keys and finally reached the last door. This was the final door to exit the prison building, and they could see the main prison gate standing ajar through the small glass pane. However, this was a door they had never tested, and none of Tim's duplicate keys could open it. With all their keys used up and the door still locked, the three were filled with regret, facing the prospect of having to go back inside, so close to freedom. But Lino noticed something. The door frame was made of wood and could be easily pried off. He asked Tim for the chisel he had brought with him. Tim and Stephen worried about being caught due to the loud noise of Lino prying the frame, and told him to stop, but Lino refused. Lino's continuous blows managed to break off the door frame, and the three of them opened the final prison door. They quickly put on their civilian clothes to leave the prison, and the clever Tim even took the pieces of the broken door frame with him. The main prison gate was now within their reach. Despite their intense desire for freedom, they did not rush out. They carefully observed the movements of the guards on the wall and the sharpshooters before the three of them slowly stepped out of the prison wall. Having escaped the prison skillfully, Tim and his friends were still tense and ran frantically, following the directions on the map Tim had brought with him. Tim, who saw black and white people as equals, hailed a taxi driven by a black driver, and the three successfully fled far away from the city. The next morning, when the inmates woke up, the cells of Tim, Stephen, and Lino were empty. Far from the noisy prison alarms, the joyful laughter of the three men resonated. This entire incident actually happened and became the most challenging prisoner disappearance case in South African history. Tim and his friends managed to make it all the way to London, where they continued their fight against racial discrimination and stood in support of the black